What's up, everybody? Hello. Welcome to another episode of Learn with Flo. We are in the attempt of making Mondays our favorite day of the week because of Learn with Flo. So if you're here with us live, thank you so much for hopefully spending some of your Monday lunch break with me. And I'm really pumped to dive into today's topic because it's going to really lead us down a little bit more of this root cause rabbit hole as we start to really dive into these differences of being able to discern as not only a practitioner in this space, but also as a patient in this space, what's really the difference between root cause healthcare and more of the Band-Aid treatment solutions that a lot of people are getting handed these days, right? And so here at the Lowdown, my methodologies, my philosophies, and my systems are really grounded in more of a passion to treat people with the respect that they deserve and provide them more root cause holistic healthcare versus I'm very, very honest with individuals, right? And even my clients and patients can probably speak to this as we are talking about their chronic symptoms, we're talking about their goals, their chief concerns. We have all sorts of different tools we can pull out of our toolbox, right? And I'm always very honest with individuals when I describe to them the different treatment options that we can use. And I like to really be clear with them. I'm like, hey, we can pull this in. This is not a root cause fix. This is not a root cause solution, but it could be a bridge that can help us get you from point A to point B with the goal that you're not on it forever, right? And then we as a team get to decide and discern, like, do we want to bring in that bridge solution or bridge treatment strategy, or is it something that's just a Band-Aid solution and causing us more stress than it's worthwhile? So if you were with us last week, we really talked about the ideas as my contact's freaking out on me. We really talked about how to discern the difference between what is a root cause treatment strategy and what's probably more of a Band-Aid solution. And I gave you guys 3 key questions to really ask your healthcare providers if that is something you're seeking is more of the root cause healthcare, right? So if you missed that conversation last week around the 3 key questions to ask your healthcare provider, make sure you go back under my reels and rewatch that episode from last week, because today we're going to go even one layer deeper and start to get even more specific around some of these examples that I shared last week around some of these more dupes that I see out there of people kind of claiming that they're kind of practicing or selling you something that's more true root cause, but really what they're selling you is probably some sort of temporary Band-Aid solution. So just like I said, I'm very passionate about treating individuals with the respect they deserve by giving them the answers that they deserve and not just this like palliative care cover-up approach. And I think we're seeing more and more this growing surge of interest around that type of care, and honestly more of a need and more of a demand around that type of care because people are feeling like they're kind of falling through the cracks of maybe some more of those conventional treatment strategies. So really excited to kind of dig into this one today, because as we really think about and go back to those 3 key questions, about what discerns like root cause treatment versus something that's more of a Band-Aid solution, I think the biggest one that comes to mind is this conversation around cortisol, right? Cortisol being our body's main stress hormone, right? But there's a lot more to it. And I think what we're seeing today, especially in more of the holistic or functional health space, is a lot of dupes out there of people talking about cortisol because they think it's trendy and it gets clickbait kind of attention, but they're actually just taking you down the same rabbit hole of these Band-Aid solutions, right? And I will say, even when we talk about things like stress, there is nothing more stressful than struggling with chronic health symptoms and not getting the answers that you're looking for, and also getting like the runaround with every practitioner that really tells you, oh, your labs are normal, everything's in your head, try to work on your stress, right? Or even the stress of like getting a diagnosis and really not having any long-term solution aside from more temporary Band-Aids and lifelong medications, right? Like those situations are very, very stressful. And those are the situations that I see a lot of my patients in as they come to me. They're like, I've seen this provider and this provider, and I've gotten this advice and this advice, and nothing's really seemingly moving the needle for me. And I'm trying to figure out how all of this fits together. And that right there is enough to send anybody over the edge, right? And it's very real and an all too common experience for individuals navigating more of the standard medical model today. And so I think as I'm seeing more of this and getting deeper into, like I said, the functional medicine work, more of the root cause medicine work, I have noticed this trend of the last few years. Honestly, I think it really picked up steam in 2024, but a very big focus and emphasis on a particular hormone called cortisol. And I think that cortisol, to me, having kind of been in the health and wellness space for over 12 years now, enough to kind of see some like trends come and go, I feel like cortisol has become the millennial equivalent of the thyroid hormone trend of maybe more of like more of the baby boomer kind of generation, right? So I mean, I still kind of see that too, where, individuals of certain generations, they might come in and they're like, I think my thyroid is off, right? And that was just kind of, call it 10, 12, 15 years ago, that was kind of our scapegoat. It's like, oh, if I have weight issues, it must be my thyroid is off, right? And now today it's almost like, oh, if I have weight issues, body composition issues, my cortisol is off. If I have hormone issues, my cortisol is off, right? And so I feel like it's kind of getting tied into that same paradigm of scapegoating, or kind of we're quick to blame one particular hormone, one particular pathway. And if you guys remember what happened when we really grabbed on to like thyroid hormone, thyroid dysfunction, we started seeing a slew of individuals just getting on thyroid medication, right? And it's like, oh, your thyroid is underperforming and that's why you're having weight struggles. Like, here's a medication, right? And you're on your way. Hardly nobody saw success from that. They're like, oh man, that's all that needed to change, was I just needed to get on some thyroid medication and like everything's hunky-dory now, right? And I'm not saying that these things don't serve a time and a place and a purpose for individuals, but I'm seeing some of the same stuff to where people are like, oh yeah, my cortisol is off. Like, what do I take for that? And I'm like, that's not the question. That's not the question we should be asking. The question should be asking is, why? Why is my cortisol off, right? How did my cortisol get off? Because that's probably going to lead us down the slew of more of a root cause care versus somebody just trying to sell you more of a Band-Aid solution because it's trendy to talk about cortisol and just sell you some of their supplement line for it, right? So I don't want you guys, like I said, to get duped by that. So let's take more of kind of like a root cause medicine analysis to this whole cortisol conversation. Really start to determine if this is like a real issue for you and your health, and then what we're actually going to do to heal versus just having someone push on us their affiliated supplement line full of adaptogenic herbs and some B vitamins and call it good, right? It's like, that's not cortisol treatment, but we can kind of, like I said, have a lot more of an educated stance on it so that you as a patient and also as a practitioner or provider out there can be more discerning of what actually it looks like to treat somebody with cortisol dysfunction, if that really is the issue that's holding them back from seeing or feeling success. So let's just start super high level. What is cortisol? I think this is going to be important because otherwise you won't be able to know, like, what is someone just trying to sell me on versus what is someone trying to really help me with rectifying the solution. So what is cortisol? Cortisol is a steroid hormone that is produced by the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands are those small triangle-shaped glands that sit right on top of our kidneys, okay? So whenever you hear like a steroid and you hear adrenal glands, it's like, oh, it's something that's going to be providing energy, right? It's going to be really revving up the body in this situation. Cortisol is usually nicknamed the stress hormone because it is very much involved in our body's stress response, but it's also involved in blood sugar balance. It's involved in anti-inflammatory support. It's involved in our sleep cycles, which means it's involved in our detoxification cycles, and also in our mood and our mental cognition as well too. So what happens is when our brain, we have certain centers in our brain called the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus communicates to another little gland in the brain called the pituitary. But how does the hypothalamus even get messages, right? The hypothalamus is getting messages from inside the body, and it's also getting messages from outside the body via all of our senses, right? So if the body senses extreme cold, the hypothalamus is like, that's a stress. Or our eyes sense a threat of like a bus coming at us, like, that's a stress. Or our nose smells smoke, right? It's like, oh my gosh, I get like a heightened stress response. So our brain uses things in our external environment and also gets messages from things in our internal environment as well too. And if or when the hypothalamus in the brain perceives a threat or a stress inside or outside the body, it's going to communicate to the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland sends a signal out to the adrenal glands to release cortisol, right? In the short term, in a really acute sense, what we see then is a rise in blood pressure, a rise in heart rate, all of the blood flow goes to our extremities, like our eyes and our head and our hands and our feet, so that we can like physically fight something off. We also see a rise in blood sugar. It also tends to shut off our body's more like critical thinking and logical brain and turns us into more of our instinctual brain, right? Things just happen. You're like, I made that decision so fast, it wasn't even my conscious brain doing that. So that's like cortisol does that in a short-term sense. Long-term, or if this happens chronically, day after day, year after year, month after month, all the time, what we see is cortisol with all of those same short-term activities, but we also start to see some long-term implications. So we're going to see a breakdown of muscle tissue. We're going to see a down regulation of hormone production, specifically sex hormone production. We're going to see improper digestion. We're going to see insomnia, anxiety, nutrient deficiencies, general feelings of someone feeling burnt out. Right? So when we kind of know what cortisol does in a short-term sense and a long-term sense, it kind of makes sense then what some of the common signs and symptoms are of inappropriate cortisol levels, right? So some of the common symptoms to look for: excessive fatigue. So meaning you feel tired even if you feel like you got enough sleep, or you experience a lot of energy crashes throughout the day. Brain fog, trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. Irritability or anxiety, digestive issues, like you get a lot of bloating, a lot of heartburn, a lot of constipation, increased belly fat, being cold all the time, like especially like cold hands, cold feet, or you feel like you're frequently sick or commonly injured, right? Those are usually signs of more of a high cortisol or just a dysfunctional cortisol situation. And so we always want to take multiple different data points, right? So of course I'm taking someone's lived experience. I'm understanding how do they feel on a daily basis. We can also look at labs too. So cortisol a dysregulation can appear on labs. I will say though, you're not going to really get a very solid picture of whether cortisol is part of the problem or whether cortisol needs to be part of the treatment plan directly from blood work. I'm just going to be honest, right? Blood work can maybe give us a solid starting spot, but blood work, the best we can do is take like a one-time cortisol reading. And that's so variable. It changes throughout the day based off of where the light and dark cycle is of the sun, depends on your stress for that day. There's so many things that like a one-time timestamp doesn't really give us a whole lot of information. But if all we have is blood work, as a practitioner, I might be looking at multiple different things. So if we have a cortisol reading, that can be helpful on blood work, but maybe I look at other metrics like what's your fasting blood sugar? Honestly, your fasting blood sugar tells me a lot about your body's stress response, right? So if it's over 90, usually I like to see your blood sugar between 70 and 90 in a morning fasted blood draw. So if it's over 90, I'm like, there's some stress here going on. Or definitely looking at thyroid function. Specifically, if we have a T3 marker, or even better, if we have a reverse T3 marker, definitely can give us some signs of cortisol. If there's a DHEA metric or some elevated DHEA on blood work, all of these things to me start to paint a picture of like, what is the cortisol levels looking like for this particular individual? I will say though, if you are suspicious that cortisol is an issue, the gold standard is you're going to want to do more of like a salivary or a urinary functional adrenal panel workup, where you can get more of what we call like a 12-hour time period. So you would collect samples like right before breakfast, right before lunch, right before dinner, and then bedtime. Right? So we can actually draw your cortisol curve on a daily basis. It's an at-home test. It's not that crazy. You can literally just spit in a little tube, or there's urinary test strips that we can do as well too. Overall, there's kind of like 3 different pictures of how a cortisol curve starts to become dysregulated. So an optimal cortisol curve would be that we see a nice robust cortisol rise in the morning, and then it gradually falls after lunch all the way into the evening so that you can fall asleep and stay asleep, right? So a nice morning rise so you feel energized. In the mid-morning is kind of where your energy would peak naturally without caffeine. And then you get this nice steady downward slope throughout the afternoon, but not a crash where your energy crashes or you become like practically narcoleptic. And then you get this nice low level in the evening so you can produce melatonin and fall asleep, stay asleep. That's what cortisol levels should look like throughout the day. What can happen as what I call stage 1 adrenal dysfunction is when I start to see a very excessive spike of cortisol first thing in the morning. Usually that's a lot of anxiety, right? Someone might say like they are anxious, they wake up anxious, they run a little bit more anxious throughout the day. That's usually, we're seeing those early signs of like stage 1 dysfunction. And then you're going to get those same kind of fight or flight feelings carrying into the afternoon with this kind of abrupt crash. Usually it happens somewhere between like 1 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, where you'll get this pretty robust crash of energy, and then your levels kind of stay too high at night and you feel like tired and wired, like can't fall asleep, stay asleep. So that's usually like stage 1, the adrenals are really over responding to the amount of stress in the system. If that persists and we don't have any sort of solution to that and we just push on through, pretend that it's not a thing, right? And don't change anything, pretty soon that stage 1 adrenal dysfunction turns into more of an advanced or stage 2 adrenal dysfunction, where now we start to see a low cortisol picture because the adrenals are just like, I'm done, right? I tried to warn you. I tried to send these signals out, and now I'm out, right? So then what happens is we get more of this low cortisol curve on something like one of those salivary or urinary panels, where we see a low level upon waking. And so those individuals usually feel very groggy, very achy in the morning, hard to get out of bed, excessive fatigue, I need caffeine to function, and feels like no matter how many hours of sleep they get, they're still physically and mentally exhausted. Right? So they kind of get like, and they have like more of this flatline curve. And I'm like, oh no, like that morning robust cortisol rise is healthy. That is a good thing. I want that, especially for immune system function and all of that good stuff. Once we start to get into this kind of low cortisol state, I honestly start to get worried about things like autoimmune disease, chronic fatigue syndrome, like things are a little iffy, because now we're going to start to impact other systems of the body, like the immune system as well too. Please note that these different stages of cortisol dysfunction are very different from things like Cushing's disease, which is like chronically high cortisol, or Addison's disease, which is chronically low cortisol. Those are autoimmune conditions against the adrenal glands. This requires an extra layer of support because now we're talking about leaky gut. We're talking about the immune system here. We have like other fish to fry than just the adrenal picture when someone has like a full Addison's or a Cushing's disease type of picture. But in more of those earlier stages of some of the adrenal dysfunction, you absolutely don't feel well. And a lot of times your labs may come back totally normal and it's all in your head and you just are supposed to put up with it, right? Or somebody might have the wherewithal to say like, you know what, I'm seeing some things on your labs, or I'm hearing some things about your symptoms where I think stress is an issue. Here's a supplement for that. Here's an anti-anxiety medication for that. Here's an antidepressant medication for that. And that can be helpful, right? But is it a root cause fix? No, right? Even the best like stress management supplements and adaptogenic herbs, like they usually don't have a long lasting life. I usually see people might feel a little bit better on them for the first kind of like 90 days, but even some of those herbal things kind of run their course and now your body's like, yeah, that was really just buying you some time so that you could fix the real issue going on here. I wasn't meant for you to just slap a pill on this and just keep pushing through the same lifestyle and the same pattern and the same choices that got you here in the first place. It's like, oh, so you wanted me to like actually do the root cause work? It's like, yes, I did. So when we think about cortisol, if someone's just selling you a supplement, someone's just selling you on a medication, like, what are we doing? We're just walking around with a bunch of like numb emotional zombies out there in the world with all of these different side effects of these types of things. And it's like, why are we not treating the real picture here, right? So the question is not like, what supplements do I take for this? Or what can I take for this? It's like, that's hilarious. If you're asking that question, it's like, you must be new here. That's not how things roll, because that is not root cause medicine. That is someone duping you into a Band-Aid solution. Here, let's just put you on some lemon balm and some ashwagandha and some phosphatidylserine. Here's some magnolia root. I'm like, cute. Awesome, but like, what are we doing? Like, none of that is going to rescue someone from stage 1 or stage 2 adrenal dysfunction, because it probably got there for a reason. So when I think about cortisol dysfunction, can we use some bridge solution products like that? Yes. Do I sometimes prescribe some of those nutraceutical products to help our adrenal? Prescribing any of those nutraceutical products without also talking about like the big major rocks that those nutraceuticals will never touch, right? So number 1, love to hear it, hate to hear it, prioritizing sleep, right? I'm not talking about quantity of sleep. I'm talking about quality of sleep here, okay? Big advocate on deep restorative sleep. Ideally, 30% of your total sleep time should be deep restorative minutes. If you are wearing any sort of like wearable technology, a Whoop, an Oura Ring, an Apple Watch, anything that tracks your sleep, you can actually see like how much of your total sleep minutes are coming from more of those like deep restorative minutes. If you're curious about this too, I talk a lot about the sleep quality and how to look at that in your wearable technology in my intuitive interpretation mini course for all things wearable technology. So you can always take that little mini course that I have available on my website as well too. So we really want to think about light hygiene, sleep hygiene, opting for an earlier bedtime. Yes, I'm talking about everybody operates under a similar circadian rhythm there. Watch for things like screens, screen exposure in that situation, right? So it's like, yeah, we can take supplements, but I'm also going to be talking about our sleep. Like, that's so freaking important. Or number 2, we're also going to be talking about your blood sugar balance. There is nothing more stressful on the human body than riding a blood sugar roller coaster 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? There's no amount of ashwagandha in the world that is going to override your body's stress response from blood sugar, okay? Blood sugar highs, blood sugar lows sets off the alarms in the brain here. So this is where nutrition honestly becomes your best medicine. And also, when the more you're riding this blood sugar roller coaster, you are losing a ton of nutrients here, specifically minerals, right? Sodium, magnesium, potassium, chromium. Like, our minerals are draining quickly. And talk about like adrenals that are struggling, low minerals, 110%, right? Which is why, here's a great plug too. If you guys have ever seen out on social media, like mineral mocktails and like adrenal mocktails, cute, adorable, great, love it. But why are our minerals low in the first place? You can keep putting minerals in, but if you have a giant hole in the bottom of your bucket because you're not really addressing the root cause, yeah, keep taking your mineral mocktails, keep taking your ashwagandha, but like, what are you really doing, right? It's like, chances are you're going to feel like you're spinning your wheels, or you'll be like, well, that didn't work for me. I'm like, well, of course it didn't work for you, because you were only addressing like a very surface level solution. We also might need to think about modifying our workouts. That's a tough one sometimes, especially if we tend to try to use exercise as a mode of coping with stress. it can be a slippery slope relationship here of like too little exercise, too much exercise. But let's be honest with yourself, especially if you're more of kind of like a type A high driven person. Does like starting off your day with an alarm that blares at 5 a.m., getting 6 hours of sleep, running to a Orange Theory class or a CrossFit class on an empty stomach, fueled by like pre-workout and coffee, does that sound like a low cortisol start to the day? No, it sounds like an incredibly high cortisol start to the day. And then we come home, we feel burnt out, we feel drained, we grab a cup of coffee, and then like, who knows what happens with the rest of our day. We probably feel hangry. We probably have a ton of sugar cravings, right? I'm not surprised because cortisol is running the show in that situation. So some individuals, we need to talk about the stress of workouts. Some individuals, we need to talk about auditing things like caffeine and alcohol consumption. Both of these are stimulatory to the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis, right? So that's why a lot of people, when they have more coffee, they actually feel more anxious. And a lot of people too, they have more alcohol, they feel more anxious. I have talked to quite a few people who get what they call like an anxiety hangover. Like the next day after drinking, they're like, I am so anxious the next day and I don't even know why. Right? And it's like, yeah, that's because caffeine and alcohol, especially for certain individuals with certain genetic tendencies, may not process the caffeine and alcohol well. We may need to look at liver health, liver function, and overall, like auditing the caffeine and alcohol is probably doing more for you than all of the like adaptogenic herbs and adrenal mocktails. I'm like, that's fine, but I don't think that's really going to move the needle too much for us. And then the last thing I kind of listed here, and again, all of these aren't for everybody. These are just kind of the big rock things that I want people to consider outside of just trying to band-aid with a supplement. The last thing I listed here was spending time in nature. This goes back to sleep as well too, because honestly, the sun is probably the master regulator of our overall circadian rhythm. So if you're having issues with like, man, I'm getting an excessive cortisol spike in the morning and then I'm just crashing in the afternoon, or I'm staying high as the day goes on, or if I have just like a low cortisol all day and I am just groggy, draggy, I can't get going, like, hello, we need some red light in our life. Like, get the sun on your eyes, on your skin, first thing in the morning, ideally, and like spending as much time outside as humanly possible will really help regulate your circadian rhythm for sure too. So even in the winter months, so that look like go for a walk, go for a hike, put your bare feet in the grass while it's not covered with snow here in the Midwest. Drink your morning coffee like outside while watching the sunrise and listening to the birds. Sit by a body of water if possible. Sit around a bonfire, right? It's like get outside, right? Those things are so therapeutic for the overall immune system as well as circadian rhythm too, because you have to think about like our body in and of itself, it doesn't run based off of a clock. Our clock is the sun and the moon. Right? So as woo-woo as you want to make it, that's us being our cavemen selves who, before we had any sort of like digital or analog clocks, our body didn't know what time it was. It knew where the position of the sun and the moon was at, which is what regulates our body's overall hormonal release, right? And sleep patterns. So sorry, not sorry, but cortisol is not something that you're going to like biohack and bubble bath your way out of. You're just not going to, right? I'm not saying that those things can't be helpful in some situations, but they are what they are. They're just a bridge solution. They're more of a band-aid, and they're like, well, these might help you feel a little bit better in the meantime while we work on some of the big rocks underneath the surface. But like I said, all of the adaptogenic herbs in the world, they're going to lose their effectiveness over time, and because nature even knows you can't out-supplement the real root cause work, right? So it always kind of comes back to, like I said, those principles of root cause medicine, of understanding the body does have an innate capacity to heal, and we trust that. And we also want to look past just band-aiding certain symptoms, and we're looking for the source. Like, what's the source of the dysfunction? And also recognizing that there's so much empowerment that we can take into our hands. We don't have to outsource our health to diets. We don't have to outsource our health to other doctors and providers. It's like, we can do this, right? We have a lot of autonomy and we have a lot of control, which for a lot of individuals, especially when we're struggling with health concerns, giving somebody that autonomy and that control back in their hands, they're like, oh my gosh, my body just took such a big exhale. It didn't feel like it was out of my hands anymore or out of my control, which can feel very high cortisol situation, right? So hopefully, like I said, just digging into like what cortisol really is and kind of taking it away from maybe just another millennial hormone trend like we've seen in the past with like thyroid hormone, where we just expect to be able to get on a medication and go on our merry way with the same life that we lived to get us into that position. It's the same thing with cortisol, right? And the cool thing is we have so much influence to change it, but change it for the long term, not just like another supplement line, right? That's not how cortisol. You're going to be able to be a discerning patient and be like, ooh, I see right through this. I see what they're selling me, and it's not necessarily a root cause solution, right? So hopefully that feels empowering for you guys. Again, if you have any curiosities about this topic a little bit further, especially if you own any sort of wearable devices, this is something you can absolutely see and track on your wearable device, whether it's from your sleep, your heart rate variability trends, your resting heart rate trends, your menstrual cycles, and your basal metabolic rate, your basal body temperature is what I meant to say. You would be an awesome candidate to do that next deep dive in my mini course, my intuitive interpretation guide for your wearable technology mini course. It's a mini course. There's bonus modules in there. There's downloadable ebooks. Like, have fun, right? Dive into that content and that resource. That's on my website, and I'll also put the link in the comment section here for you guys too. So dig in, and like I said, hopefully you guys find some extra cortisol gems in putting this into action for yourself as well. But have an awesome week, and we will see you guys next Monday.